Well, hello and good evening, everyone. Good evening in Eastern Standard Time. I'd like to welcome everybody to Curious Minds with GailNow. Now, tonight's show is going to be a bit different, but still centered around curiosity and centered around the work that I do, which is sign up, suit up, and show up. Just this week, I attended a city council meeting as a delegate. And one of the things that was really interesting about attending the city council meeting. It's been a while since I went to one. For some of you know that I am a recovering journalist. So I used to cover council meetings. I definitely have a curious mind when it comes to what's happening around us and what is it that we maybe need to know as residents. And one of the things that came up at the meeting, one of the councilors said this, that poor process can lead to negative emotions. And the reason I was at the meeting was I'm a new curler. So there has been lots of issues swirling about the idea of curling in Windsor and the loss of a rink or a curling rink. So before I go much further, I do want to invite on my very special guest who was involved with the Save Rosland curling. So I'm going to bring Terry Fink onto the stage. Hello, Terry.
Hello, Gail. How are you?
I am great. I'm going to let's move you around here.
Okay.
So we will also have another guest that's going to be joining us shortly. Now, actually, she is on her way here to my studio, and she's going to be live in studio here. Now, you're here in Windsor as well. And just for anybody that's new tuning in, because Terry, you asked about my show. So my Curious Mind show has put a spotlight on really covering a lot of the stories and issues that are, we need to sometimes get more curious about. We need to ask more questions. And Terry and I used to work together. Terry was my boss at one point in time. And we crossed paths again around the issue of curling. So let's start with the issue around process. And for anybody, again, any people tuning in tonight that are interested from the curling perspective, we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to put it in the context of why we need to be more curious, why we need to look at process. And we want to touch upon the issue of public consultation. Terry, we heard at City Council that they wanted public consultation. They want more involvement. And let's look at, why don't you give maybe for people that may not know what we're talking about curling and what's happening. Can you give a bit of a scene setter of how you got involved as well?
Well, I got involved. The interesting thing is that the curlers found out probably about a year and a half ago, maybe almost 2 years ago, that the curling rink at Rosland was going to be demolished. And a lot of people didn't understand it. And the curlers got together one night and they were talking about what could they do to save Rosland and what was the process to go through. And many of the people did not know the process. And three of my best friends, unknown to me, sort of collaborated instantly at the meeting and said, we should get this guy named Terry Fink that we know really well. He knows process and community planning and all of that. And maybe he'll help us. So I always tell the story, 3 guys showed up at my front door and said, we got a job for you, but you're not going to get paid. And so they said, you have to help us. And we're all curlers. And I've curled before at Rosland. And you got to help us through this to understand what's facing city council and administration. And how do we guarantee that we're going to have a curling facility at the end of this? So that's how I got into it. Gail, the planning process for municipalities is pretty clear. It isn't hidden documents that you got to go read and find and locate. Usually it's quite simple, is that the role of council is to look after the needs and the wishes of their community. And how they do that has very many roads, of course. But when there's a public issue, usually that public issue would get identified by administration and say, council, we're hearing and you're hearing, and it's a public issue that we're thinking about closing Rosland, or we're thinking about building a new recreation complex. And so in let's sort of take the positive side for a second. If you're going to build a new recreation complex, you have to create the case for support, because as administration, you have to take that issue to council and you have to describe what the case of support is. Why do we need it? Well, we need a new arena because the 1967 Centennial Arena has been around for a long time and it's falling apart. And here's our investment record. And you can see from the record, the financial side, excuse me, that the town or the municipality is putting a lot of money into an old building. And at some point, you have to say enough is enough. And so that report would probably say that. And then would give a recommendation about what do we need to do? Well, we need to build a new arena because we can't continue to play in this arena because there's structural integrity problems. That means usually that you would have probably already done a culture and recreation master plan, and that looks after that whole community and starts to identify what the recreation and the leisure needs are and puts it all in perspective. Sometimes they actually put it on a timeline too, to say, in some of these buildings, 2 to 3 years from now, you need to do a structural analysis to make sure that it is safe. Sometimes it's so far gone, and council in their wisdom can see that they are facing a major issue. So the major issue in this example is we have to replace the arena. Council may ask for what we would call a feasibility study. Is it feasible for us to build a new recreation complex? And then we start asking questions that we need answers to. How much is it going to cost is always the first one, of course, because we have to protect the taxpayers' money. So how much is it going to cost? And then where should it be located? How should we operate it? And who's going to use it? So the case for support would say, we've got 14 organizations that would use ICE, and we look at the feasibility and the scheduling of that ICE. This is what it would look like, and we would have rented all of the prime time. Prime time ICE is usually from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon to probably about 10 o'clock at night. And then, of course, on Saturdays and Sundays, it starts probably at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the morning and goes to 9 or 10 at night. And of course, that's when everybody is home. The kids aren't in school. People aren't working. Mom and dad can transport the kids to play hockey, figure skating, public skating, and everything that we do on the ice. Broom ball included too. So that feasibility study, they would hire a private consultant because they want objectivity. They don't want the staff to do it because they're going to be biased one way or the other. So we go out and we hire, through a tendering process, a consulting firm that does this type of work. We employ them and they go to work. The key part is there's engagement. So in the feasibility process, the consultant company would go out and solicit all of the users and all of the community to come in and say, what do you think about this issue that council's identified that we need to replace the 1967 arena with a new recreation complex? And we would ask questions. The consultant would ask questions. Why do you think we need it? What do we need it? How big should it be? Who should operate it? How are you going to get all those ice times in there? And then, and what's it going to? How much is it going to cost? Mm-hmm. They may even say, do a little bit of an operational review because we have a Parks and Recreation department, and do we need to expand the staffing if we're going to make a recreation complex? So they may look at some of the structure. So they go out and they do all of that, and the community has its say, and it's usually reported in the newspaper. Gail, you may want to ask me a question at this point.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, this is helpful to give a scene center, because then the next question is, we have now a decision was made by the City of Windsor to
yes.
Get rid Rosland Golf and Curling Club. So again, for anyone not aware, we have a Rosland Golf and Curling Club in the City of Windsor. Yes. And like I said, I came into this more later in as a curler, and then all of a sudden it seemed that And then COVID hit and things seemed to get shut down. And
Right.
I guess you're doing what should have happened with the process, or what could have
Yes.
happened, right? If we wanted to avoid what now is happening, is what we call that negative emotion, because now
Yes.
other ice users are looking at
Yes.
getting bumped out of rinks at a time when we need probably more ice time, not less.
Mhm.
And a couple of things that I've noticed, and this is me as the reporter in me, right? Number one is I questioned that they said, well, there's this sense that curling isn't very popular. It's not needed. But how I first got involved was I saw a post on social media, and that's how I got into curling. And then I noticed all of a sudden, no more learn to curl, no more curling on Sunday. It seemed to be that. And then we went into COVID. And one of the things that stood out from a city report, and I never got an answer to this yet, it said during the pandemic, the clubhouse and curling facility were closed and limited maintenance/repair were undertaken during this time. Now, Terry, your background is you were a director of Parks and Recreation.
Mhm.
Why would the maintenance not happen during COVID? Like, is that something that they would just stop maintenance in all public buildings during?
Well, the answer to that question is most municipalities. So the answer is no. Most municipalities took that opportunity when everything was closed to go into their buildings and fix them up, and sometimes paint them, tear walls down, construct walls, change structures around, but do a lot of preventative maintenance. And Gail, you've mentioned it. For some reason, the curling club, the Rosland facility, they chose not to do that. Which which leads us to the fundamental question about, at one point, Rosland was a very, very active facility. Golf and curling, a restaurant, an auditorium, and dressing rooms downstairs, and community meeting rooms. And at one point, Rosland was the place to go for lunch, for your Sunday breakfast, different wedding events, personal celebrations, and all of those. And it seemed to just slowly deteriorate. And really, no one paid too much of attention to it, because we all thought it's just going to come back. They're in a phase of review and getting ready, set to relaunch it. And we all kept asking questions. Well, what's going on with Rosland and things like that? We never knew, because it was never in the newspaper. It was never in the media. We never knew. And I guess a lot of us just believed that the city would turn the lights on one day, and it would be back to normal. So if we reflect back now, there were probably all kinds of signs. So one of the restaurant, they stopped managing the restaurant with the director of Rosland, and then they tendered it out, and it didn't work. They tried contracting all of the kitchen out for the weddings and things like that, and that didn't work. So there were a number of revenue generations, not golf and not curling, that supported the complex, but that slowly died. And then I think we were left with a lot of information that we had no idea about.
Right. And, one of the things too is that it seemed that, I've studied social media. I look at, and I noticed that there's a lot of attention there's a lot of golf posts, promotions of golf. They have events there. But curling, there's not as much promotion. And like I said, the other thing I thought was strange, that they no longer have as much. They've just started now putting out Learn to Curl, which I thought was very strange, the timing of it, because so long we seem to not have as much promotion. Now, we do have a guest that was a delegate at the city council meeting, and I think she's here. She was going to stop by live in the studio. She may still do that, but I think she's on her phone and going to be able to pop in, because one of the things that, when we're talking about public engagement and transparency, we saw at the city council meeting too, the other issue was the time of the meeting. While we were waiting there to be a delegate for 5 hours to speak.
Mhm.
This is what's interesting. Some of the questions I had is that if you want to encourage public participation, we had delegates. We were the largest group. There was 5 or 6 of us, and
Well, more than that, yeah.
or 6, 7, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So you would think if you really want to encourage more people to come out, you could probably put those delegates at the start of the meeting rather than having people wait so long, right?
No, right.
That was one question that came to me, that is that possible in municipal structure to do that, to move up,
Yes.
have a large group, move the delegates up so they don't wait for hours?
Yeah. The agenda gets developed by the clerk's office and then confirmed by the mayor and council. But they have the privilege of moving any agenda up forward or backwards as long as all of council, the majority of council agree. So in this case, and that would usually start with the mayor just wanted to follow the agenda.
Right.
And therefore we did wait a long time.
Yeah.
But if you value public engagement and that, you may want to look after the people who have come to council to make presentations. Yes.
It would seem that would be part of. So as I said, tonight we all sort of got involved in this because of the curling issue, but then it's opened up now some discussion. I've talked to quite a few people, even about the meeting time, because the council originally said they were going to move the meeting time from 4 p.m. To 1 p.m. And then out of the blue, it seemed there was a record. Now they're meeting at 10 a.m. on Mondays, and decided not to have public consultation around that decision. And council voted now to move to 10 a.m. And that was the way it was. Yes. That's the decision. So Paula Gignac is another guest on tonight. I'm going to bring her on. Now, Paula was another delegate who brought up a lot of information, a lot of questions. I also asked questions about the Rosland, board minutes. And now what I find very strange as well, let's bring Paula in, but I want to ask you about the freedom of information, because, when you encourage people to come out and you want people to be involved, but then you don't release minutes from a golf and curling club, it sort of makes me scratch my head and wonder why. But okay, let's bring Paula on, see how, okay. Hello, Paula.
Hi, Gail. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Paula.
Hey, welcome.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. Okay, welcome. So we have you here. And we have inspiration from Inga. So good evening, Gail, Terry, and Paula. Thank you, Paula. If anybody else is popping in, I know some people, some of the people too that are, there's a lot of chatter about this. I'll maybe read a few things from Facebook posts. There's been a lot of people not happy right after Monday night's meeting, which is the reason why I decided to have this show, because I hope even people, even later can watch this and it can, spark some further discussion. But one of the things I noticed is that of all the delegates, people came, did a lot of research. Paula, I believe you spent a lot of time digging into the issue of the minutes and history. So let's get Paula to talk a bit about that, because council never asked any questions about the information you brought up. So Paula, if you can, let me just try here. Let me just move here. We're going to move Paula up to the big screen. There you are. You're on the big screen now, Paula. Can you talk a little bit, kind of summarize, as a curler, what information did you seek out? And can you sort of summarize what you talked about at council first? Just give a summary of what you found.
A few things that I was looking into was the transparency issues between the council and what was happening with Rosland for the last few years, what's been happening with the public's voice, and what the community needs. And a lot of that didn't seem to be happening. And when in past people had attempted to receive the board meetings, the operation minutes, to try and find out why wasn't Rosland being maintained. It seems like almost for the last 8 or 9 years, Rosland maintenance has been deteriorating. There's a lot of upkeep that we noticed with the sheets, even with the people changing staff. It's been quite I don't know, just chaos in there. It seems like the left doesn't know what the right's doing. And when you ask council about these things, it's a closed door. They didn't want to release the information about the operations, about where curling was, why wasn't there a business plan for curling, even though there was one for golf. There was issues with who the shareholder is and saying that you're not entitled to the information. Even through the Freedom of Information Act, I understand there was a few people that had requested things and they were denied.
Okay,
Yet,
before we go on, I just want to interject, just for people again tuning in, we'll just do a touch base. Rosland Golf and Curling Club is it's taxpayer funded. The money that goes into operation of that, and Terry, correct me if any of this is wrong, but Rosland Golf and Curling Club is paid for by taxpayers in the city of Windsor. And for the upkeep, it's staff that keeps everything updated. And I know a curler that told me it's like the golf course is maintained beautifully. In fact, has said it's probably one of the, like, it's often a course people really like going to because it's kept in such great order. So you would think that Rosland, that it's a city-owned property, that it would be easy to get the minutes or get access to information about decisions made. And also, before we go on, Paul, I want to come back to some of the information you found. But Terry, could you talk about how people, were there any curlers on the board? And because it's Rosland Golf and Curling Club, and it's a public entity. So, and I know you have firsthand information on this, so this is not hearsay. What happened when people tried to go on the board as a curler?
Well, the municipality has a process, and they produce a document that says, here are all the committees that we want public people to be on. And Rosland was one of them. So a number of people, curlers, we'll just narrow it right down. Curlers said, well, I wouldn't mind being on the board at Rosland, curling, and I know a little bit about golf too. And so they made application, and then they never heard another word. And maybe a month later or 6 weeks later, the city produced a list of all the committees and who was on them. And of course, there were no curlers that had applied assigned to the Rosland board. So they just didn't get selected. It always felt a little funny that there were no curlers or golfers on there, and there were only 5 people on the board.
Two were from city council.
Yeah,
city councilors, right?
Yes.
So
yeah,
and
it was a very small board.
And no
it's
one
actually a mystery about actually the process. It's not a documented process about how you get on the board. The 2 appointed members that were not council, it doesn't even cite on the city's website how they are chosen, if there's any criteria. It's a mystery, and to try and to dig into that, you can't get answers to that either.
Yes. So Gail, I think can we ask, and Paula, you may be the best person to answer this question, is why is Rosland different than the WFCU, the Windsor Family Credit Union Arena, or a community center? My understanding is there's a special board there, Paula.
Rosland was bought by the city, but as a private corporation, which then became a municipal corporation. The WFCU is part of the city in its entirety, whereas Rosland only receives fees for legal, payroll. They receive a rent lease amount. It goes back and forth intercompany items between the city corporation and the private corporation. And under the bylaws of the corporation, how the board is chosen is done through there. It's not a fully owned subsidiary of City of Windsor. So it takes all the revenues supposed to be for its upkeep, but somehow everything is not going where it's supposed to go for Rosland. And it hasn't for a number of years. And it looks like it dates back to probably when the aquatic center opened.
Mhm.
That's when
Okay,
things dramatically started changing.
so the aquatic center, let's give some years, because I know, Paula, you were connecting some dots, and you gave some details at city council that no one asked any follow-up on, but you had some information. Now, what I was hoping might happen is at city council, no, this is what happened. They would have clarified, but they didn't ask any follow-up questions. So can you explain what you found out about the budgeting from what happened before Aquatic Center and after Aquatic Center opened? So for anybody, because we have people from
Certainly.
all over tuning in, I've had a few private messages. People are excited to hear some of the content here tonight. So can you for anybody not understand that may need to have a better understanding of the Aquatic Center, which was opened, again, anybody that knows about pools are very
2014.
expensive. Yeah, 2014, the Aquatic Center, and it was a pool and a what do you call it? Leisure?
The water park.
Water.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
just for, again, those tuning in right now, that Aquatic Center is only open, I believe, 2 days a week. And
The water park is.
Mhm.
The diving facility and the swimming area is 7 days a week.
Okay.
And they are very busy on that side. But the water park is only Saturdays and Sundays. I believe it's 12 to 4. So 8 hours a week.
Okay. So
So-
let's look at, so we had an Aquatic Center open, and the reason this is important is, I'm going to let you explain that.
So we have through the city what's called a budget that's put out every year. So we ballpark and estimate what we feel will go into city amenities. So there's a recreation budget. Now in 2013, the budget variance, or what the actuals came in at, was 500 and some odd thousand more than what they budgeted. So they had a surplus. In 2014, which is the year the Aquatic Center went in, the very first year when the actuals came in and comparative to budget, they were 600,000 in deficit. My understanding from the other documents is that currently that Aquatic Center is running $4 million in the red that the city is having to put in every year. And I don't believe it's the diving facilities and the pool. I think it's the overheads for the water park. I mean, it's not really bringing in revenue. I don't believe it met the needs. But at that time, if that money is coming out of that recreation budget as a whole, that means it's not going to other recreation facilities. It could be Rosland. It could be your ice hockey arena. It could be many things, but that money is definitely not going there. They are running a deficit, and it continues to this day.
So, so it seems to be there was a correlation then between when the Aquatic Center, all of a sudden curling seemed to be more of a problem, like the problem child.
Like I noticed at Rosland at that time, then it started shifting. Like Terry was speaking about how they were catering things. They were taking the food portion of Rosland and they were subcontracting it. And there was a lot of changes at that point. But also you notice that the facility was not being maintained. The washrooms, the roof, the ice, like there was a lot of gaps that were happening with the maintenance, and you could see the building just, not looking well. And it continues to this day. I know curling in there right now, the roof is leaking. The facility hasn't been updated in a number of years. And you can see that it's not busy. It's not full of people. They stopped doing what they did well.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to now switch over again to going back to looking at process and how we landed here. So I'm going to bring Terry back up here. So Terry, when it comes to, we also want to explain a little bit about ice time. So that was another issue. There was a public meeting recently where, Terry, I believe you were kind of a lead on this, pulled together. There was a lot of people talking about ice time in Windsor. Want to be clear on this, that curling ice is not the same as hockey ice. Completely different. For anybody new tuning in and going, well, so we slide into an arena instead of Rosland. We take up, part of the ice for part of the week. No, once that rink is gone from skating or hockey, it's gone, because there has to be curling ice put in, and it's just different. You don't skate on curling ice and you don't curl on hockey ice. So I just wanted to clarify that to people. So now we're at a place where we have this, number one, I think a lot of people are kind of happy because we asked for some information about the history of what happened with Rosland. And maybe if we had full disclosure, maybe people could wrap their heads around it or accept it. But instead, let's jump to what happened at council when administration recommended one arena, but now they wanted to listen to curlers. So Terry, can you give some context to that and about the survey that was done?
Yes, certainly. So just on the ice concept is that on a hockey rink, which the curlers are going to end up with, there will be what we call 5 sheets of curling ice. And the curling ice is at a different temperature, and it's called pebbling, so that there are little bumps on the ice that allows the curling rock to travel from one end to the other. So it's very different, where in ice with ice sports, whether it be even hockey or figure skating or public skating and even broom ball, you couldn't skate on pebbled ice. And so there cannot be multi-use of a curling rink for any other type of ice sports. So very, very, very different. Humidity is different. Ice temperatures are different. It's completely A and B. You got a curling rink and you got a hockey rink, and they'll never be able to be the same. So that's it. So part of the process that we went through in planning was in trying to understand where the city was coming from. There a committee formed of Save Curling in Windsor, the future curling in Windsor. That committee then produced a survey, and so it asked a number of questions about curlers. And it did say if there was going to be changes at Rosland where there would be no more curling and the city was going to force us to go into an arena, we did ask the public and the curlers where they thought it would be best. And so there was the Windsor Family Credit Union that has 4 sheets of ice, 80 Knox that has 1, South Windsor Capri Recreation Center that has 2, and those were the ones that were listed. And so the curlers picked the closest one to Rosland, thinking, of course, that if it stays in the geographic area of Rosland, everybody would know where it is and may not get lost. And so consequently—
Can I just ask one question before we go further? That survey, who put out the survey?
The committee did, the curling committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and it asked people, when did that happen?
That happened after there was one meeting that the Windsor Parks and Recreation had a meeting, and they were beginning to talk about it going into the community rinks. And they asked a question, which arena would you like curling to go in? And with that philosophy that I just mentioned, the curlers suggested South Windsor Arena, which is now titled the Capri Center.
So, and this was an answer based on people were picking this based on, they had no idea what was in the arena or anything. It was kind of
the city didn't give any other options. Right. That was the point. You had no more options. There were no options presented.
So the survey basically gave what the city was proposing, not necessarily the group.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So which leads to, Gail and Paula, the most interesting point is, if we go back to the feasibility concept, is that we think that the city was going to tear down Rosland without any consultation with the curlers. So, and Paula, you had mentioned it, the building sat there for a long time, and nobody knew what was going on, nor what the plan was.
No, yeah, it was like
And
that for quite some time. Yeah.
yes, and so when you do a feasibility study, you start to ask all the questions, and you ask the public what they think, and there has to be some alternatives to come up with. So they didn't go through that step. So there's the first big mistake, is that the community was never engaged in what is the solution to this. And so that was the problem. So we finally, the curling committee and the curlers when we got together, we were trying to save Rosland and the curling. Well, those decisions had already been made, unknown to us, because we didn't know where the alternative was. So some of the alternatives, one alternative was to move into an arena. The second alternative could be to keep the curling rink and demolition the rest of the building. The third one could be to build a curling rink right at Rosland, self-contained, and leave curling right there. And the fourth one could be something that we don't know about because we never investigated that. So
well, that was something that I noticed was in 2016, PwC, Price Waterhouse, they did an audit of the facility. And at that time, in those recommendations, there was no mention about the curling. There was only spoken about the golf and that a business plan should be put together. They talked about all of the positive things to move forward with golf. There was nothing in there about curling. It was as though they were already in the process of eliminating it out of Rosland back in 2017. And that's a few years before it came to the table to talk about the changes in Rosland.
Yeah, and I think the most important point you're making there, Paula, is eliminating curling, but they were also prepared to eliminate curling in the whole community.
Yes,
because it really wasn't until the committee got active and started asking a lot of questions, and going in front of council, did council finally come up and say, hey, we maybe we should put it into arena because we have so many hours of prime time not being rented now.
And I think that's why the committee was looking for the minutes from the board meetings, from the operations perspective, and also the communications and the reporting back and forth to the city. And so far, none of that has come to light. And it leaves a lot of questions as to what this plan was, but it sounds like it was just to eliminate curling, period.
I agree. Gail?
Well, I was going to say, one of the things I know is if you want something to die, you just don't maintain it. You don't support it. You don't promote it. I mean, I see this all the time, like, especially marketing, right? If you're not investing time into promoting something, and even on Twitter, it says Rosland Golf. So that was maybe another thing that they, and I understand that's a short form on that platform, but so let's step back again and give some context too, because the idea of this show is that I want to talk about, public engagement and also process, and going back to that comment from one of the counselors, poor process leads to negative emotions. And I want to just read something from Facebook, because this is what's now happened, is now it's become this issue that people are upset. And I think, one of the concerns is that when you don't have a good, consistent process, then it seems that it may appear that people are treated differently. And perception can be reality, right? So, and we saw it with, golf gets maintained and promoted and supported. We saw that the cricket community, and Terry, you talked about that at council, that seemed to be where the city did do some process and community involvement.
Yes. It's a great example. And it speaks to some of my earlier comments, where an issue gets identified in a community, and the people who are carrying the issue work with administration so that they understand it. And probably we would look back, and cricket was likely, and I'm almost positive it was mentioned as an emerging sport in the city of Windsor that needed to be addressed. So there's the issue. So from a planning perspective at the municipal level, so now they're going to do a feasibility study. They've picked the park, and they're going to spend $100,000 on planning the cricket pitch. They're going to go through that consultant process that I described earlier in the show. And then they're going to gather all that information up, and the consultant's going to write a report. And administration are going to bring that report back to council and say, this is how we spent the $100,000. This is what we know from the feasibility study. And the logical next step is capital dollars, because they now have to build the cricket pitch. Now, in all of that process, the engagement factor is there, because they've hired the consultants. In the terms of reference, it says they have to go out into the community, not to talk only to the people who want cricket, but also to the community and the people surrounding that park get a say. They have an opportunity. So, and again, when administration comes back, they should be able to tell council, this is what the community is feeling about the development of that park with a cricket pitch in it. And so they would identify that. So council then is really looking at it and saying, it looks like we've covered all our bases. We've heard from the cricket people. We've heard from the neighbors. We've heard from the greater community through the planning process of a culture and recreation master plan. And what the consultant is presenting to administration, to council, is a reasonable project. So it will probably cost, and there are cost estimates in the feasibility study. Maybe it's going to cost $1 million to do this. Maybe it's going to cost $850,000. But the feasibility gives council all of that information, because remember, council has to make the recommendation, and it has to be moved and seconded. So they're the ones that have all the final say in it. They know exactly what needs to be built. They know exactly the budget figure. And so in the budgeting process, maybe of 2024, that number now starts to enter into the budgeting process. So when they approve the budget, they approve the money for the cricket pitch. Always we wanted to do is say, why can't we be treated the same way as in this example, the cricket people?
Well, and I think it's, go ahead, Paula.
Good. I was just going to mention about that when I was there with council, I had recommended that a committee be started for the curling, to have curlers on it and golfers on it. And we could get a voice from the public about, and from curlers that are in this. But maybe it boils down to, maybe it's Parks and Rec as a whole needs to have a committee with the different activities and people represented from those activities. Perhaps we need to have a public committee to advise with Parks and Rec and say, this is what our needs are. This is what our challenges are. These are the facilities we need. How do
Paula,
we do this?
I was wondering, could you just speak to the private corporation once again? Because that's when we look at a public park, we can see the process pretty cleanly. But when we bring in Rosland, it has a private board. And it has a different relationship, because really the Parks Department isn't involved in Rosland at all, whether it be golf or curling, whereas the Parks Department is running the parks and equipping them and maintaining them and scheduling them. But all of that, when you get to Rosland, doesn't happen.
But before, and I don't want to answer that, but yet the parks and who is keeping up the golf course? They don't have separate staff. It's city staff.
No, but they all work. Yes. They work for the Rosland Corporation.
Right, but their city staff work. So it's like no.
Oh, the only city staff I believe they are now. Oh, well, I stand corrected.
Well, that's a good question. We'll jot this down to C. That's a good question, Paula, because I believe this isn't going to go away, and because there's still more. I mean, when curious minds are involved, I see there's some other people joining in, listening, and one of the things I think is that we at the very least, want to encourage our counselors, because they said this the other night very clearly. Most of them said this. They want public engagement. They want people to be involved. They want people to reach out, and they also talked about using the tools. So this show is a way to engage. And if there are anybody listening, any of the counselors that want to stop in, pop in, and comment, please do so. I'd love to have any interaction, and if you can answer that question. But Paula, I know you have a good understanding of corporations and how they run. Can you give a bit more elaborate, as Terry said, on just explain to people, because that is a puzzling thing for taxpayers to understand why these minutes aren't public, why we can't get access to board minutes, and why, as a public entity that is a golf and curling, you would think, because I think there were golfer, or at least strong golfing support on the board. I don't think there was a strong voice for curling. I
Agreed. The board itself is 3 counselors and 2 appointed members. The corporation itself is a municipally owned corporation that was purchased back in the 70s. And then the sole shareholder is the city of Windsor. Then within that, you have officers of the corporation, which is your treasurer, secretary, vice president, president. I believe all of those were city employees. When you look at how the contracts for the employees are done, they follow the city of Windsor, I believe, the union, their policies. The payroll is actually paid from the city.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether or not the operations are run by another individual, which it looks like they hired general managers for the last 10 years that operated supposedly and reported back to the city. It doesn't look like they were getting direction from the city, but they were reporting to it. But I have not seen those reports going back and forth. With some investigation, I have found in the city council minutes, the report numbers that seem to have been filed. They were not discussed in council, but they were submitted as this came from the management. So I want to do some digging, and I would like to go through the Freedom of Information Act now that I have all the report numbers and the city clerk file numbers, and request the minutes from the shareholder meetings, the minutes from the board meeting, the operation reports, as well as there should be the financial statements on the city website, but they're not easily found. I understand they are there. I don't think it separates curling from golf so that you can see the different operations, but I believe the profit and losses are there. But it does take quite a bit of digging in the website. The website is not easily maneuvered, and I'm pretty techie, and I, had a difficult time in finding certain things, and it was very time consuming.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I stand corrected, and I think Paula is exactly right, that they are city employees at Rosland.
And they are, so this is where it gets puzzling, because if it's city staff, we saw the general manager of Rosland Golf and Curling Club sitting at council meeting with the other staff from city. So it's not like it's like, oh, this is an entity that's like, it seems very integrated into the city, except when you ask for the minutes, except for your, and again, I think the positives out of all this is that there's been work done with the other ice users, and curling people, the curlers aren't looking to unseat people. That was never the goal. And I think if it seems that if information could be brought forward, share them, like, to me, if there's nothing untoward, then just release the minutes and say, here's what happened. Here's why we did it. And like, to me, if it's like, hey, let's show that for whatever reason, there was discussions made at the Rosland board about curling was a problem. Here's why. Here's the discussion. Here was the votes. Here, I don't know why that wouldn't be made public. Like, we're not, and I know they
you really need to identify those challenges.
What's that?
And I don't believe they've identified the challenges to the to see if the public is the fundraising we can do. Is there some solutions outside of, and it starts with transparency and knowing
Hold on just a
where
minute,
the
Paula.
issues
I'm
are.
gonna just pop, hold out just a minute because you're kind of cutting out. Just a minute. Let me try this. Okay, move at the stage. Oh, there we are. Let's see if that's better. You're cutting out a bit. Let's see if that's any better.
Okay.
Okay.
How's that?
So, and go ahead.
Go ahead, Gail. Sorry. I didn't know if you wanted me to repeat where I was at. Yeah, so we really need to identify it. The issues, and we're not getting that transparency to know where the public can help or how to help. Even at the council meeting, I think it was difficult. Even you had 5 minutes to give a lot of information and to ask questions, and you didn't even have time to wait for a response. And then afterwards, after your 5 minutes, there were no questions from City Council about what we inquired about what we were concerned about. That was kind of disheartening.
So back over to you, Terry. This is looking again at what could have been done differently. You started off tonight's show talking about how the proper steps in a process, feasibility, and right now it seems we don't know a lot of what happened originally because we don't have access to the minutes. We don't really know what happened. And then that leads us fast forward to what happened the other night at the meeting, which left many of us puzzled because I always looked and go, is this how decisions are made when it's, and one of the counselors seemed to ask after, to recommend all of a sudden to listen to the curlers, and that particular counselor, the recommended one, I believe, or the one that was going to be recommended from city staff was in her ward, her area. And now it seemed to be there was a decision made to now listen to the curlers from a survey that people may not have all the information when they were deciding in that survey. I always question surveys. Surveys are helpful, but they're not always that scientific.
Right.
It was a very abrupt shift in the council meeting from one facility to the other, from the WFCU to the Capri Center, and it had no logic or rhyme or reason.
That's yes.
Other than they said that they wanted to listen to the curlers, but this survey, I guess, would you consider that a scientific survey, Terry, with your experience?
Well, the questions were vetted very carefully and to outside people before the survey went up. We have to remember though, the survey was limited because the city was saying you can only go to one of the 3 arenas.
Right.
So always we were talking about was the arenas. And
well,
our continuous point has been.
If you look at the math too.
Oh.
Yeah.
The math was very concerning because there was 42%. Can you hear me, Gail?
Yeah, now I can. Yeah.
Okay.
So
there was 42% that chose the Capri Center, but there was only 4 options.
That's correct.
If you think about the percentages, they were probably quite close. They weren't like a huge majority went for the Capri Center. So even that didn't make sense. Why they would shift from the WFCU to the Capri.
Or why they would shift from any. And I think, Terry, what you were recommending or what the Save Rosland committee or what the curling committee, I guess, was recommending was to sit down and really now look closely at all the options.
Yes.
And have discussions. And then, because my guess is people were choosing that's what I meant by saying, I don't mean the questions weren't bad, but it's like, if you have to choose with something, but you don't have all the facts and you're saying you're forced to answer something, you may pick something without knowing like, oh, I didn't know that was, or we didn't know who is going to be unseated, who's going to be impacted by this. And that's why we have a lot of the other ice users. Just before we go on, I want to read, this was, let me see if I can find this. No, I lost it. Just a minute. Let's see if I can find the, Terry, you were going to say something. So while I'm looking up the Facebook comment, can you?
Yeah.
Actually,
Well, just to go, Paula, did you want to jump in there?
yeah, Terry, you do remember when you were having your discussion with council and
Yes.
you were asked about whether or not there was consultation with the curling group?
Mhm.
And I remember your response was very peculiar when it came to trying to stand up and say that it really wasn't a conversation.
Mhm.
I don't know if you could elaborate. I know you were answering questions at that time.
Yes, yes. So, one of the counselors was asking the question that there was one meeting with representatives from the Rosland board, and we were trying to understand why was this all happening in that, and the counselor was wanting to describe that as community consultation. It is not community consultation. It was a listening to try to understand what the problem was at Rosland, and so that's not community consultation. Community consultation is a process where you open your books in front of the community, and the community gets to ask questions and make recommendations, and it's a little bit of what we could call discovery of what could possibly go on in a geographic area or a greater downtown area, for the people to be served their leisure and recreation opportunities. So
Yes, and they
it wasn't.
maintained that that the curlers had consultation, public consultation,
Well,
over and
then
over again.
over and over, and then the next point that council did make was saying, well, the Department of Parks and Recreation did hold an open meeting, and I agreed with them, they did, but it was a restrictive meeting. Once again, you were only given choices of the arenas to move the curling rink to. So there was no discussion about, can we keep the curling rink in the existing building and tear it all down? There was no conversations about, can we rebuild a curling rink on the Roseland parking lot? There were no
Yeah, it wasn't
conversations.
open.
Yeah,
It
it
wasn't
wasn't
open
open.
dialogue.
Yeah, and
No, not at all.
the next one is, what about a private-public partnership? That was never investigated. So we were constantly fighting out of trying to get community consultation, and we were constantly being blocked all the time because there wasn't transparency.
Mhm.
And now
And
I understand
the
it's
issue.
not just the curling that's not having open dialogue, but even now with the hockey players and the ice skating, they don't seem to be able to have open dialogue. And they've been talking about that this has been happening a long time with them as well, that they get bumped from one facility to another, sometimes without notice. They're having difficulties as well. And I think now moving us into one of their arenas in one of the rinks, this is just going to make the situation worse for them too.
I think you're absolutely right, and so do those people think that it's going to be worse for them. So one of the things we have to remember in a larger city is that we have communities within communities. So we have the South Windsor Arena, renamed now to the Capri Center. In a sense, the two ice pads that are there were designed to feed from the community of South Windsor. It doesn't mean if you lived in Forest Glade, you couldn't come to South Windsor and vice versa. It's just that it was a neighborhood. It was the gathering place of the neighborhood where that neighborhood could come together. It works
Right.
on that concept, and it also works on a larger citywide concept so that we have ice all over. So yeah, maybe sometimes if you live in Forest Glade, you may come to South Windsor, or vice versa. Or if you live in the West End and 80 Knox is really close, you may go to Forest Glade. It doesn't
Right.
preclude that. But to make strong, livable neighborhoods, in the design of the city, you put recreation facilities in it so it looks after the leisure and the culture and recreational needs of that community. So you always don't have to travel. And we want walkable neighborhoods.
Well,
We
and
want a livable community.
now I think the community there now will be displaced. Like they're talking about now,
Yes.
moving from one arena to another. I understand the ice skaters, they have limited
Mhm.
coaches, and they tried to bring up the point that their coaches go back and forth at the Capri Center from the
Yes.
rinks. And now they're not going to be able to do that because they're asking them, well, we have ice time over here at another facility, but they can't drive back and forth. That would
Yes,
be
you're
absurd.
right.
And so now
Yes,
you're going to lose
yes.
skaters.
Yes, you are.
Like,
So it's the delivery of the programs now that get greatly affected.
Mm-hmm.
And our activities are regressing. You know, we should be growing. The city of Windsor has changed in the last 3 or 4 years with a lot of things coming to Windsor. And instead we're depleting our recreation budget, and we're depleting our recreation facilities by, you know, eliminating them. And yet we haven't even looked at another I want to say an analytics to look at what the community needs. What does Windsor need now that it's growing like this? And that's missing too. We've changed.
Yes, certainly. You know, and I've mentioned a culture and recreation master plan, and that's the purpose of doing a master plan every 3 to 5 years. And so that master plan helps council address the emerging needs and where we should be going and where we should be spending our tax dollars. It should be on the people. It should be about services. So I think we really haven't said it, but I think we're entering into a very challenging time for recreation and leisure services in the city of Windsor.
And, you know, the title of this program was, is there power in public engagement and can you fight City Hall? And the reason I don't mean fight City Hall, but, you know, like people say you can't fight City Hall. But I think, you know, one of the goals here, and I want to thank you both for coming on, just because I know this will be shared. Other people can hear some of the context. And, you know, what's really important too is the idea of collaboration and working with all of ICE users. And this is not, I'm sure, you know, as an entity, you know, city councilors have a lot to juggle. They have to make some tough decisions. And I think I know myself, like as a taxpayer as well here in the state, like it's not a matter of just saying spend whatever. But what's missing to me is that when you don't have access to the right information and when things aren't, you know, shared in a way, when it's taxpayers' dollars have been spent on Rosland, and then that's where we're at, right? And I think there's still this will live on. People like Paul, I believe, there's a few people that will still want to continue to ask more questions and, you know, get that public engagement piece, right? Is because that's really important that we have that outreach. So just to wrap up, anything else that we should mention on the show in terms of that idea of public engagement? And maybe if there was a recommendation to council of what to do next or in future. Terry, do you want to?
Well, yes, if there's anything, I mean, we know where we're at today. We know we're going to go to the Capri Pizza Center from a curling perspective. And we also know where other hockey sports or ice sports are going. They're going all over the city and at different times and everything that Paula has said. But one of the things that still remains, we're not clear what is going on at Rosland. I can tell you all the rumors, but we're from a transparency side, we are not clear what the future is at Rosland. And my second point is we have to look at the quality of life that we're creating in Windsor. And Windsor was not recorded in one of the livable communities in Canada. And our two sister neighbors were the town of LaSalle and the town of Tecumseh. And Windsor
we're ranked 168th.
Yes. Yeah. And so
and
livable
Tecumseh
community.
And LaSalle made under 100.
Yeah. Quality of life remains a question in the city of Windsor. And servicing the needs leaves something to be desired right now. Those would be my ending comments.
Okay. Paula, do you have any ending comments?
Yeah, I think that I would like to say that there are some processes that we can do to receive some of this information. But I think that the process right now is very convoluted with the city council and how you get your voice to be heard. And I would hope that, even with the counselors themselves, the process, I know they're trying to make changes with the time and so forth. I think people need to use their voice and let them know that they would like to be part of this process and tell me how I can be part of the process. I will continue to keep digging and try and find a way to get rid of some of the mystery and cloak and dagger with the Rosland Golf and Country Club. But I hope other people come forward too. This is concerning. This is our community. It's for our children. Um, the activities, they are for young, old. They should be for everyone. And right now, I just kind of feel that that wasn't important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we definitely, I want to thank you both. I mean, this started a conversation. This is not the end. It's probably just, part of a process. And as I said, as part of Curious Minds, what I always like to ask is the why, and not so much, we may not always like the end result, but if you can encourage and truly encourage public discussion and engagement, and if you can also you know encourage our council and encourage any public entity to provide information when asked, especially when it's taxpayer money. I think that's the biggest thing, that the question that still remains is why this information isn't public, and I would expect that of any public entity. So okay, I'm going to have you go in the green room. I'll be in there shortly. So I'm just going to remove you off stage as I say my final words here, and I'll see you in the green room. Hold on.
Thank you for
Okay,
having me,
thank
Gail.
you both.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, thanks everyone for spending time with us on Curious Minds talking about public engagement. Obviously, it was around curling, but it also has to do with the issue of public engagement overall. So thank everyone. Please, if reach out, you can reach me pretty much on most social media platforms, gail@gailnow.com. If you would like to provide any further information from what came out tonight, we would be happy to hear about it. And we will continue on. You can stay tuned you can check out, subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, and you can also drop a comment. And thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. And I know there's lots of comments. This is a hot topic over on South Windsor Watch on Facebook as well. So you might want to check out that. And I want to wish everyone Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays and all that. And I will see you next time on Curious Minds. Ciao, everybody.